Welcome, everybody, to our Bioregional Open Dialogue number 9 on Indigenous Knowledge Systems in Bioregional Contexts. It's the 25th of March, 2026, and Bill and I are very happy to welcome Joshua Waters from Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab to our session today. We're recording this session, and just before we start and getting into content, as we always do, we want to just very quickly say what's going to happen. I'll do a little bit of engagement guidance, and Bill is then going to do the context setting for the session. Then we'll have Joshua Waters presenting. And then, as always, in these open dialogues, we're going to facilitate the dialogue part of that. And then there's a bit of closing at the end. Okay, so just for everybody who's new, many people of you are the usual suspects, if I may say so. But if you're new, just a couple of points that I want to make. We're asking you to please stay on mute when others present. We also welcome if you have your cameras on, but understand that that's not always possible. And make sure if you want to eat or drink something, no problem if you have your camera off for a moment. What always also happens is that you may have questions during the presentation, either from Bill or from Joshua. Please add those questions in the chat sidebar right as they occur, and we'll curate these questions to cover them in the facilitated dialogue segment. And sometimes when there are similar questions, we may summarize or cluster certain questions for timing and efficiency reasons. But every now and then we may ask you to voice them yourselves. In that case, we ask you that you respect everybody by keeping your questions succinct and on topic and respectful, of course. As always, we do have an open dialogue Google document that runs in the background. If you just click on the link or see it in the chat, I may say, and Bill will surely put the Google link into the chat. We have this dialogue document open. This is to really prevent distraction in the sidebar and keeping the questions really succinct to the presentation. But if you want to add more information, this document is your go-to place, and we will just need to. Okay, thank you, Jonathan. This will be publicly remain accessible also after the event. We will also post it on our website, so you can always go back to that document. If you have contributions to make and you want to be identified, please add your name before you make that contribution. And the session and the slide deck and also the Google Doc will be posted on our Open Dialogues landing page on our website. I'm going to show you that more towards the end of the session. As I said, it's already the 9th of these sessions, and we started them actually already late in 2024 in response to popular demand for a dialogue space to delve deeper into collective sense making, and then started them more routinely in 2025. And what you see here is a whole set of sessions that we had in 2025, and also already the first 2 sessions in 2026 on relationalized finance and bioregional contexts with David Bollier and Natasha Holst, and also the very successful last session, Limits of Limits with Gaia Harrington and Indy Johar from this year, February. And so, yeah, you see this is already quite a lot of stuff. If you want to follow backwards, you can do that. All these sessions are on the Bioregional Open Dialogues landing page. The link is here below in the slide, and then will also be available on the web page. Okay, that is enough for an introduction. And Bill, I'll hand it over to you for the intro to today's session.
Great. Thanks so much, Ralph. And We are really pleased to have Joshua Waters here with us from Deakin University's Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab and the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Collective. And so I just wanted to give a brief background on how Joshua's work got onto our radar screen. So, as many of you would know, we at R3.0 are pursuing a bioregional knowledge commons. We're stewarding a community of inquiry and practice around that. And we have honed in on a project around mapping bioregional practices and patterns in knowledge commons. And as part of this work, we recognize the foundational role of Indigenous knowledge in bioregional practice. And so we are engaging with Indigenous knowledge holders and others around this line of inquiry. And so a while ago, Mulaney Goodchild, an Anishinaabe scholar who has spoken at the R3.0 conference in the past, posted a link to some of Joshua's work, which really was both exciting and it blew me away. This was work that Joshua had conducted on an Indigenous knowledge approach to literature reviews. And I added that link in the Living Resources document. So we can thank Mulaney for Joshua getting onto our radar screen. And Joshua, this is actually your first view of a document that we're going to be sharing with you in more depth going forward. So this is just the story of how this intersection came into play. But really, it's an act of honoring the role of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous knowledge systems in the work that we're pursuing on bioregionalism. So, without further ado, I'm going to hand it on over to Joshua to speak for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then we will open it up to an active dialogue. And here you can see Joshua's bio, but we won't ask you to read that now. That's also on our website. So Joshua, over to you for presenting.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Everyone can let me know if they can see that okay.
Yes, we can see it. And there we go. It's in presenter mode. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill, for the warm introduction. I really appreciate that. And I would like to start by saying good morning or good evening, depending on where you're joining from, or good afternoon. And thank you for being here. Um, Here where I am, it's 6:30 a.m. in the morning, so I'm on Australian Eastern Standard Time. And I'll talk more about my location and my locatedness and where I'm at shortly. So, as Bill mentioned, my name's Josh Waters. I'm a senior research fellow with the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab at Deakin University, but I'm also a second year PhD candidate in the School for Humanities and Social Sciences, which is also through Deakin University. And you can see there that the presentation today is called Spatialities of Relation, and we're looking to resituate bodies in bioregional practice. Looking at the list before, I think this will be a little bit of an edge piece. Uh, and probably sits a little bit more conceptually than maybe logistical or practical or administrative. But there will be some sort of interactive and practical components that I hope people could walk away with today. So this presentation draws on a paper that I co-wrote with Distinguished Professor Yin Paradies. So some of you might be familiar with Yin's work. He works primarily in the space of sociology, but also kind of postmodernism, and I'd say he's sort of delving into a bit of a deep metaphysic. So this paper has been submitted to the Journal of Social and Cultural Geographies. and will hopefully give some guidance, like I said, conceptually and philosophically around bodies and their relationship with place. And I'd just like to also, excuse me, acknowledge the presence and the importance of my other supervisors in these dialogues and conversations in this work. So many of you will be familiar with Dr. Tyson Yonkel-Porter. So Tyson is the founder of the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab at Deakin University, and also the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Collective. So I work quite closely with Tyson, and Tyson will have some of his influence kind of interwoven throughout this piece as well. And also my other supervisor, Professor Anna Halafoff, who's a professor in the sociology of religion. And lastly, I'd just like to thank Bill for the invitation, and thanks for shouting out to Mulaney as well. Mulaney's a good friend and colleague of mine, and back in 2023, we actually set up a sister lab with Algoma University, which is where Mulaney was working at the time. So Mulaney was actually heading up that Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab, and some of the work that we're doing with an institute called AIM, Australian Indigenous Mentoring Experience, aims to continue to build sister labs and Indigenous knowledge systems labs across the world. We're aiming for 10,000 by 2030. And so lastly, I'd just like to thank all of you for joining on and being part of the presentation today. And just a bit of an overview of the presentation, just to what to expect. It's pretty simple, but also really important. And much of what I'll be doing and how I'll connect it to bioregional work will be just drawing on the ways that current projects and current research initiatives and current sustainability efforts are looking at nature for inspiration, and looking at drawing out some of their patterns to inform the way that we go about our work. But what I'll hopefully do today is resituate the body and the person and the human back into that ecosystem, because sometimes it can be a little bit abstract, where we're looking at things like, mycelium, or we're looking at estuarines or ecological systems and saying that's really fascinating, that works in nature. How can we incorporate that into something that we do in our business or organizational settings? So part of what I would like to try and do with a lot of the work that I'm doing is kind of putting the person back in those ecosystems and making them less abstract. And in this presentation, I'll be looking specifically at the body and some of the practices and processes that help us understand our roles and significance. But before I go any further, I'd like to say Yamangin Daig, Galigalga Geringeo, Giril to Roldanang in Nale Naundi, Nini Winangalawangandi Dai, Yanani Gomlung Yananya. And in my language of Gamilaroi, that just roughly translates to hello and good morning and greetings to you all. My name's Josh Waters, and I just would like to pay my respects to the spirit of this land where I am today, which is the land of the Yagara, Yugurapul, and Turrbal people in southeast Queensland. So, as I mentioned, as a Gamilaroi man, I come from an area which is roughly about 17,000 square kilometers, or I'm not sure how to convert that into miles for anybody playing at home, but it's roughly on the central east coast of Australia, and it sits just west of the Great Dividing Range, which runs vertically from north to south up and down the east coast of Australia. It's filled with gently undulating plains. It has its own river systems, and there are seven that make up Gamilaroi country, and soils that shift between deep red clay and sort of more dry black soil, the two main soil types there. And at this time of year, we're approaching emu mating season, uh, and we read the stars to understand where they are, how they're moving, and what role they're playing in the broader ecosystem. So these patterns help guide and move help us know how to guide ourselves and move across the land and respond throughout the year. So the reason why I wanted to share this was because land in this context is not a backdrop or a resource that we can extract. It's a living field of relation, and I'll keep coming back to that throughout the presentation. It can be a calendar, it can be a compass, it can be a watch, but it can also be a relative and a friend, and something that obviously plays an important role in life on Earth. So when we acknowledge country, it's not really a symbolic gesture or a genuflection of goodwill, as some politicians in Australia will put it. It's a protocol. Um, these protocols exist to uphold the relational integrity of place, and they orient us within a field that already holds story, law, memory, and responsibility. Um, and to come back to the presentation, so the body is central to this process. It is how we read, how we sense, and how we participate in these relational fields. And this means acknowledgement is not just something that we say, but it's something that we do, excuse me, through how we hold ourselves in those places and how we enter into ongoing relationship with it. You'll hear me talk a lot about country, and I'll be using the word country, so not too sure how familiar people are with the way that particular word is used in Indigenous contexts in Australia. But you can see there's a lot of different things that make up country. So it's not just land, but it's made up of all of the interconnected and overlapping complex domains, which include land, but also water, sky, seasons, um, and it also includes the atmosphere, the stars, and wider celestial bodies and the cosmos. It also includes ancestors, dreamings, and laws that emerge from those dreamings. And they also include stories, songlines, and relationships that connect people, place, and time. For those less familiar with um, these terms, so dreamings typically refer to the foundational metaphysical processes through which the world comes into being and is continually renewed through ceremony, ritual, and spiritual and cultural practices. Law in this context refers to the systems of responsibility, uh, including ceremony, but also governance and kinship, that sustain all of the relationships in the community. And songlines is an interesting one. If you don't know about songlines, it might be worth having a look into. I'd recommend Lynn Kelly's, sorry, not Lynn Kelly, yeah, Lynn Kelly's Memory Code. Songlines are pathways of knowledge and movement that traverse the land. They carry story, memory, and instruction, and can be walked or sung to maintain and renew those connections and to navigate oneself as they move across the land. Taken together, country is not a collection of elements, but a living integrated system. Humans and other species are not separate from it, but they are expressions of it, and knowledge emerges through participation, ongoing participation in that constantly unfolding, ever-present whole. So the body, many of you will know what a body is. You have one, but contemporary understandings of the body have emerged through a mix of biological, social, and cultural frameworks that position it as something to be studied, classified, managed, and worked. In many modern contexts, the body is treated less as something that participates in a wider relational field and more of an object to be worked on, worked through, and worked out, or optimized within systems of production, biopower, surveillance, and control. As a result, bodies are often exploited, commodified, and shaped by political, commercial, and ideological processes. They are rendered as sites of labor, performance, and display, framed as bounded, individualized, and regulated through systems that tie their value to productivity, efficiency, and visibility. In this framing, the body is positioned as something acted upon rather than something that actively participates and shapes the world around it. what I'm describing here is a shift in how the body is understood. So in many colonial and modern contexts, the body is framed as separate, bounded, and self-contained. But this framing is, as we know, very limited. Um, as Mashalese, 2011 reminds us, we need to avoid totalizing the body as a singular stable concept, because in practice, bodies are not fixed or discrete entities, but they are porous, distributed, and constantly unfolding through their relations. What we think of as the body is always in flux, always exceeding itself through the connections that it is part of and which give it life. In Indigenous contexts, the body is not simply acted upon, but it is active within law-based relational systems that bind land, kin, spirit, and more than human worlds. It is governed through relation and responsibility rather than control. And from this perspective, the body becomes a living interface where place and spirit encounter one another. It is both a site and an agent of knowing, shaped through ongoing reciprocal relations with country. This is where the shift becomes practical from colonial to indigenous. Bodies are not just in a bioregion, but they are of bioregions. They participate in the sensing, the signaling, and the response systems of place, registering conditions, interpreting cues, and helping to modulate what action, restraint, timing, or withdrawal is appropriate and when. In this sense, the body is always engaged in a process of sensing, interpreting, and responding within the relational field that it is a part of. So bodies in this sense function as living intermediaries through which relational fields are sensed, interpreted, and responded in real time. This sensing extends beyond the five recognized senses into a broader register where things like changes in the wind, light, sound, animal behavior, and bodily feeling are read as relational cues. These are not separate signals, but expressions of a connected field which the human body and bodies in general are a part of. They carry meaning. Sometimes they carry permissions, sometimes they carry protocols, sometimes they carry knowledge, but also sometimes they carry warning. Through this expanded sensory capacity, bodies become a primary site where relations between human, non-human, and more than human worlds are encountered and understood. You might recognize in the moments where something shifts before you name it, in your environment. The hairs that raise on the back of your neck when you enter a place of spiritual or cultural significance. There is a hesitation before stepping forward, or a quiet sense to wait, to turn back, or to move on and come back later. At other times, there is a clarity, a feeling of ease, a sense that you are moving in step with something that is bigger than yourself. You may otherwise observe signs in the forms of bird calls or anomalous sightings of species that bring you messages and meaning, or a light breeze on your face telling you that it's okay to proceed. These are not simply internal states, but embodied responses to changes within the relational field, signals that are learned, refined, and trusted over time through practice and participation. And sometimes that's across many and several generations. What emerges from this is not a set of fixed rules, but a patterned responsiveness shaped through ongoing engagement with place, which we come to term as protocols or a blueprint for how you exist in particular places. Relationality in this regard is lived through timing, movement, restraint, attention, and awareness over time, and sometimes, as I said, many generations. Bodies learn to discern themselves when to act and when to withdraw, and in this way, bodies do not simply transmit signals between place and spirit, but they participate directly in their continuous unfolding, contributing to the regulation and renewal of relational systems. Here, bodies are not merely conduits, but they are an active, ever always co-creative participant in maintaining balance across the relational field. And you can see there, so I've put the three main sort of pragmatic or material categories on the right-hand side. And when I talk about spirit, I'm usually referring to those things that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, which was why they were a different color. But the dreamings, the stories, the memories, and all the other non-material kind of things that we would term as abstract. So when I talk about place and spirit, you can see place on the right and you can see spirit on the left, but also all of those things can equally constitute as interchangeable. Land can be spiritual, sky can be spiritual because of the stories and dreamings and laws that are attached and associated with those things.
Josh, there was a question if that was, oh, okay, that you've moved the slide now. There was just a question of whether that slide, that, okay, so that was the intermediary body was the slide that you were just speaking to. Okay,
Yes, yeah.
great. Thank you, Corey, for that question.
Sorry, I didn't move on. Um, so the five co-processes of relationality, sorry, not the five co-processes, but these are five co-processes. I don't want this to be sort of a final thing where this is how you do it and you kind of check off against it. It's not like that. But these are just five things that I would say are important in relationality and harboring good and right relations and connectedness to the land predominantly, but country overall. So the intermediary role of the body can be understood through these five co-processes. So you can see they're co-constitutive, co-constructive, co-evolving, cooperative, and co-regulatory. So these are not stages or steps, and they don't operate in a linear sequence either, I would say either, but they're a little bit iterative. You can kind of revisit any of them at any point, depending on what the land sort of is asking or beckoning of you. Uh, they describe overlapping and ongoing ways that bodies participate in maintaining relational coherence across social, ecological, and spiritual domains. What they offer is a way of understanding relationality as something that is fluid, dynamic, and constantly in motion rather than fixed or abstract. Across these co-processes, the intermediary body is not a neutral bridge between domains, but it is an active participant in sensing, interpreting, and responding to the relational field that is always moving and always shifting and always unfolding. At any given moment, the intermediary body may be helping to bring relations into being, shaping conditions through action or sometimes absence, adapting alongside changing environments, coordinating with others, and responding to feedback from place and practice. What matters is not control, and there is no attempt to um, resolve the tensions on the land, but sitting in that and being responsive, understanding where attention is going, what timing is required, and what level of care is needed to sustain balance for ongoing regeneration and renewal. And just a summary of each one of those. So co-constitutive uh, refers to how bodies and place bring one another into being through constant relating. Co-constructive speaks to how action or inaction and timing shape the conditions for life to flourish. Co-evolving recognizes that bodies and environments change together over time, adapting in response to shifting conditions and seasons. Cooperative highlights how relations are coordinated across human and more than human worlds, sustaining collective balance and planetary health. Cooperative highlights how and co-regulatory points to the feedback processes through which place signals what is needed and allowing time for bodies to adjust, recalibrate, and respond. Um, and I guess an example of how nature does that is it doesn't just quickly shift from uh, autumn to winter or where you are from spring to summer, but there are gradual transitory processes that are involved in that, and humans can sometimes be a part, will always be a part of those processes, but can also facilitate them. So in practice, what this looks like is how embodied relationality shows up across different domains. So I wanted to make this a little bit practical as well. So rather than remaining conceptual, it becomes visible through how bodies interpret signals and respond to the conditions that they're a part of as it co-becomes with it. This is where the intermediary role of the body becomes practical. It shapes how decisions are made, how land is engaged with or not, and how relationships are maintained and sustained over time. In governance, this might look like sensing group dynamics, noticing shifts in rhythm or tension or alignment with decision-making processes in the body. A typical approach might focus on process, moving through agendas and reaching outcomes quickly and efficiently, but an embodied relational approach pays attention to what is being registered in the room. Is there hesitation? Is there fatigue? Is there something unsettled or tense? These are read as signals of the relational field in our meeting rooms as much as they are in our ecologies. And the response might be to pause or to slow down or to revisit the direction of the decision itself if it needs to be. In land-based practice, this includes reading ecological cues and responding in real time to what each of the conditions require. A typical approach might rely on data, depending where you are, models and predefined interventions. An embodied relational approach still values that knowledge, but adds another layer, paying attention to shifts in atmosphere, sound, animal behavior, or a felt sense that something is not aligned. These signals guide timing, and they also guide scale and whether or not action should occur at all. Excuse me. In community contexts, number three, it involves recognizing patterns of trust, strain, or cohesion as they are felt and expressed. A typical approach might prioritize participation and outcomes and try to quantify that. No, excuse me. An embodied relational approach attends to how the group is holding together as a relationally coherent body, noticing withdrawal, overperformance, or tension, and adjusting the process to restore balance rather than simply pushing towards completion. And something that I'll just highlight there is um, the extended use of body. So as bodies, as individual um, as individual bodies, we can gather and make up collective bodies. So, as the body begins to scale, those felt feelings that are sensed and experienced at the level of the individual then become collective and distributed. So, the scaling of the body means scaling of the experience and scaling of the emotional attunement that is required at those levels. At the level of the practitioner, it requires attunement to bodily signals, intuition, and responsibility starting there, rather than acting purely from plan or expertise. These things, and such as leadership, can be distributed and contextual. This might mean acting in one instance, but it also might mean pausing, stepping back, or not acting at all in another instance. Here, the body becomes a guide for how to move within that relational field based on those relational cues and place and position and authority within certain spaces at certain times. In terms of practice, so relational practice begins with how we attend through the body. And you can see that I've put a short sort of framework together, just off the top of my head, called it sensor. But it offers a bit of a simple way of working within this practice, and you can use it as your own at your own discretion. I was going to do a quick activity today, but I think I'll give you the time and space to put some of those things into practice how you will. It begins with settling, which I'll add is not settlement for obvious reasons, but taking the time to arrive properly in place and slow down enough to become present to what, but also who is already occurring there. From here, we engage with place, learning its story and history, context and its conditions, and the language that it speaks, its aggregate properties, and the sum of its informatic exchanges and synergistic entanglements is what Deborah Bird Rose would call them. I encourage you to check out Deborah Bird Rose's work if you ever get a chance. With time and place, we can begin to notice what is being signaled through both the body and the environment all at once and respond accordingly. From that point, we seek orientation by asking what this place is asking of us, rather than acting from assumption about what it needs. embodiment is critical and enactment must follow as a response, which may involve action, or alternatively, it may require pause or movement, or sometimes stillness and silence, or complete withdrawal. And finally, reflection allows us to notice what has shifted, what has been returned, and whether our response supported or disrupted relational coherence. Together, these movements form a simple but ongoing practice of co-processing with place. A spatiality of relation. So you might remember that from the title of the presentation. So spatiality of relation reframes space as a living field rather than a neutral, objective, material container. Space, place, and time in Indigenous contexts are not separate, and most of our languages show how they're entangled through law, memory, and ongoing relation. So in Gamilaroi, there's a suffix that we can add to certain words, which give it a tense which captures space, place, and time. So it's the the space where it is, and the place where it is, but also the time that it is occurring. These are all the same thing. So what has occurred does not just disappear into the past, but it remains present as orientation and instruction. And sometimes this is quite literal in Indigenous contexts where the stories and the histories and the energies and the essence of things, activities, behaviors, ceremonies, and rituals from really long ago, before sometimes long ago in time, but also the instances where time is described as outside of time. But they're still present and active and ongoing and shaping the present moment. So it remains present, has orientation and instruction. It shapes how bodies move and respond in real time as well. And Tyson also notes in Sand Talk how many Indigenous languages do not separate these concepts, and the place where something is located is also the time in which it exists, held together in continuous unfolding. In this sense, space is not fixed, and it's not necessarily just material or inert, but it's elastic and responsive, shaped by relational memory, excuse me, rather than abstract geographical coordinates. What emerges here is not a departure from embodied experience, but an extension of it. Excuse me. And I'll just skip a little bit of that. I'm just conscious of time. But emergent relationalities will be
Joshua, please don't feel like you have to rush.
okay.
You're doing fine. So
Okay, I'll just jump back because I wanted to highlight this notion of spatialities of relation and where it comes from. Um, so it comes from the work of Merleau-Ponty, who describes the spatiality of situations. So what he suggests is that the body is oriented toward the world, and there's this um, notion of towardness. As I'm sitting here, I'm leaning toward the desk that I'm sitting at. I'm leaning toward the my laptop, and I'm leaning toward the people that I'm engaging with and talking to. But in an Indigenous context, the towardness is not always the thing you're leaning towards, and there's always things leaning toward you. So essentially, what I'm trying to capture in this context is something a little that takes that a little bit further, and that's that the world itself is oriented toward relation. Um, and bodies do not move through space as detached observers, but within relational fields that signal invitation, refusal, readiness, and restraint. And presence and absence can become relational acts within that field. And to move well within a space is to remain attentive and responsive to what that place requires of you, participating in its ongoing renewal and relational worlds through things like ceremony, custodianship, kinship, and ritual. And these can look different for everybody. So, some people might dance on the land, some people might sing while they're gardening, some people might, um, continue custodial practices like burning the country or um, doing these things in the right way. But the thing that distinguishes them from what I'll talk about as um, maladaptive relationalities shortly is that they're done in consideration with what the land needs, and that there's an attunement to what is needed, when it's needed, how it's done, under what authority, and how it connects to the history and culture and languages of those places where those practices are being implemented or re-implemented. And just this section on emergent relationalities. So relational systems are dynamic and self-organizing, and what emerges within them is shaped by by how bodies participate in those systems. Presence, absence, timing, and response all contribute to the patterns over time, and these become, I guess, the bioregional context that you're all working within, and these places are all subject to the histories and the practices that have shaped them long, long before we came into them. So all of these places have a story, and these stories should inform the way that we engage with those places. Presence, absence, timing, and response um, are not neutral. They can be regenerative and they can support balance, renewal, and continuity, or they can become maladaptive, as I mentioned before, where signals are ignored, relations are strained, and imbalance begins to amplify. So we're seeing a lot of these symptoms and, like I said, maladaptive relationalities that are coming out of ignoring signals, ignoring the bodily cues and what's happening, what our systems are telling us are important, and what should be done, because the compromisation of and the introduction of a new value system, which prioritizes a lot of things that go against that are completely contradictory to bodily presence and embodied and planetary health and well-being. In this sense, the systems are still always responding, even if we want to pretend like they aren't. And feedback loops constantly reinforce the direction that they're moving in. So these things are happening anyway. Relationality is imminent and relationality is infinite, in the context of how we connect with land and how we sustain ourselves and how we be present and coexist with our bioregions. Regenerative relationalities, on the other hand, which is basically the opposite of maladaptive relationalities, are relationalities that emerge when bodies remain attentive and responsive and attuned to place. While, on the other hand, maladaptive relationalities emerge when those signals are overridden or disregarded. This is where discernment becomes critical, and knowing when to move, when to wait, and when to withdraw shapes not only individual action, but the broader trajectory of the system itself. And just to conclude and summarize, and to wrap up, the basically what I've argued here, and along with Yin as my co-author, um, and long distance co-presenter. Um, so we've looked at repositioning the body as an intermediary within relational worlds, not as a bounded object in space, but as a living site through which place, relation, and response are continually enacted. Rather than treating knowledge as abstract or external, it has shown that knowing emerges through embodied participation, where sensing, timing, movement, and restraint all carry relational weight. And in this framing, relationality is not a fixed condition, but it is an ongoing practice shaped through attention, awareness, responsibility, and alignment with the needs of country. To work in this way is to recognize that presence is participation, and that every action, pause, withdrawal, or removal of oneself from the environment is also participation, and it contributes to the shaping of relational space, what decision we make in any moment. Bodies become part of the sensing and response systems of the bioregion, while also being in the bioregion, and practice in this regard is not simply what we do to place, but how we move with it. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Mm. Thank you so much, Joshua. And I'm going to invite everyone to embody what Joshua invited, which is to pause, and that pause is not an absence, but actually a presence. A pause to really take in and honor what Joshua has shared with us for a moment before we dive into the dialogue. Hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Joshua. We've gotten some questions in the sidebar, and I invite others to join in. And I'm going to go to the second question that came in and ask Susan. Susan, I see you're on camera and off mute. So if you wanted to go ahead and ask your question, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you, Joshua. I read Sand Talk, so that's why I was all over. I gotta listen in. And thank you for extending my understanding. This is something I've been living into, experiencing my body as an intermediary. One question I have is, as I slow down and receive these signals coming in, not having had it been part of my culture, there are times that I feel the temporality of rock time versus water time versus I was recently in your country walking in ancient forests, and but sometimes there's the speed of the hummingbird, and are all those temporalities held in that moment of now, or it, I don't want to be stuck to clock time, but there's something for me and my learning and evolution of understanding that it's like listening in chords or different rhythms at once.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful way of putting it. And I love that metaphor of the symphony and the rhythm. This is why song, I suppose, has been so important in all of human communities um and reconnecting back through those modalities has been an important part of reconnecting back with the ways that we would typically, as human beings, connect with landscapes and exist within them. What I hear you describing is basically a big symphony that we're a part of, and that we're all kind of notes or frequencies that exist within that. And there's a lot of different interpretations about that type of perspective, but like when you look at it that way, it makes sense to describe it in the way that you're describing it, because what you want is all those notes to align in a certain way that produces a beautiful symphony rather than a chaotic, um, distorted mess of sound and um and frequency that when we hear that, it kind of sends a shock through the body when you hear all notes out of order. And if someone walked up and played a piano and just hit any note, it sounds very different to if someone who is attuned and has knowledge about how to play a piano. The feeling that that gives your body is very different. So I would see that kind of as similar when you're walking through and being present within different landscapes. What you're noticing is that I loved how you talk about the different times, like rock time and tree time and all these things. And we afford these things to other um other species, where we know that insects experience time differently. We know that creatures underwater experience time differently to us. So what we've done as humans, and not, I wouldn't say all of us, but what modernity has essentially done is projected our version of time, which is a distorted version of time and seasons, onto a landscape which doesn't really function that way and operates in its own time and seasonality. Whereas Tyson's got a brilliant I can't remember the name of it. I'll send it through to Bill, but it's about the different seasons and how modern contemporary versions of time have been based on economics and finance time. So, we plant crops and we have to sell them at a certain time so that we can make enough money to do this. So, like, part of that reframing is looking at, well, that's not a season because, these aren't just financial. The trees aren't worried about how much money they're going to make from the fruit that they drop. They're just being, and they're just existing in their own way, but they're part of that bigger symphony and that bigger rhythm that it chooses to participate in, and it's conscious of its participation in. Otherwise, and it plays a functional role in the ecosystem, but also the way that we look at that is also deeply spiritual and deeply metaphysical as well, because we have the ability to do that. So yeah, we afford these things to other species. We should afford them to ourselves. So I love that reframe of saying, oh, what is rock time right now? What is tree time? Because that's how we essentially look at seasons. Going back to the comment that I noticed about the example about how bar is used. So there are places um, on our land, on my landscape, where you might describe something as barn bar. So barn is like a mistletoe. Don't know if you have mistletoe in other countries, but like it's basically it mimics the tree and it produces this sticky fruit. And there's a place that's actually called barn bar. So barn is the name of the fruit, but the bar suffix means that it's the place of and the time of barn, the fruit, when it comes into fruit. And the season is the place, but it's also the time and it's also the space where it is. And so that name stuck to that place because someone said, what's that place called? And the other person said, that's called barn bar. That's the place of, time of, and space where the barn fruit grows. But then someone then said, we'll call it that forever, when it's not meant to be called that forever. It's the place where it did grow. But because the past informs the present, it's still the place where it does grow. And it becomes a reference point for where that thing is.
Hmm. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Susan, for that great question. And thank you, Josh, for the very comprehensive response, which also did integrate a response to Roger's question about the suffix. So thank you for picking up on that as well. I wanted to go over to Ondine, had a question in the sidebar. And Ondine, if you're able to go off mute and voice that, that would be great. And then Claire is in the queue next with her hand up. So Ondine, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Josh. There's so much in what you presented. I think another participant said it's going to take a while to unpack everything. So I'm just sitting. Great appreciation. I have a similar curiosity to Susan around the temporal contexts. But I'm wondering about the temporal contexts that come from the past. So ancestors and the ancient natural world together with the future, so future generations and future natural states, and how these act in participation with us today.
Yeah, something that I was going to talk briefly about as I was answering that question before. So I'm really glad that you asked and gave me an opportunity to expand on a little bit. But I put in in response to Roger's question about how some of these temporal dimensions are acknowledged and expressed and talked about from a historical perspective. So where something is present and unfurling. An anthropologist named Bill Stanner, non-Indigenous anthropologist back in the 1970s, talked about and described this as an every when. So it's kind of like um, it's always happening everywhere all the time, because of how the past melds into the present and the present melds into the future, and they're not really seen in those rigid categories within Indigenous contexts. So it basically translates across to a Gamilaroi context of like what I put in there was Yaliwanga bar. So Yaliwanga means always. So everyone who knows English can conceptualize what the concept of always is. It's constant. And so it's used similarly in a Gamilaroi context where you can talk about Yaliwanga bar, which then adding that suffix becomes always a place of and always a time of, in occurrence with how it unfolds within the mind and the cognition. So what it does is that it situates it across multiple spatiotemporal domains where the memory of the event remains real, alive, and actively guiding, shaping, and moving bodies as they move throughout the world. And this is regardless of any kind of subsequent shifts in the material terrain. That book that I mentioned before, Lynn Kelly's Memory Code, she talks about um, how songs and memories are created through landscapes, but even if that landscape is removed or destroyed, the song remains. And so the place remains in the cognition of the human or the person who carries the knowledge or carries the story or carries the song for that place. And it stays as part of the memory. And that's why we have songs and stories about things from the past, even though the landscape has shifted so far. So there are songs that describe sea level rises or places that are now underwater. There are songs from my country that have crocodiles in the stories, but there's no crocodiles there today, and there haven't been for, probably 13,000 years up to 45,000 years. So the memory is there, and while it doesn't present as an imminent practical or material threat to have a crocodile in your backyard, the song and the story is preserved through memory, and that gives meaning and shapes how you interact and engage with those worlds, particularly if you know that the earth moves in cycles, and that perhaps, like in a lot of those stories, it says that if you don't treat the land right, that crocodile will return. And when you look at it through a fluctuative sense and you know that the earth moves in those cycles, that, human-induced climate change and a lot of the things that are happening in terms of our ecologies moving quite quickly now. And, we might, that warning within the song and the story can very much and very quickly become an actuality if you don't take heed to the meaning and the message in the story. So that's where they still live in the cognition. Therefore, they have a sense of power in shaping our reality, but also our behaviors and our movements and our decision making for future generations. So that's where that's projected into the future and saying, if we make this decision now, there's multiple ways this can go, but the story says this. So therefore, maybe we can take that into account in our decision making process and in our governance and in our ethics and in our policy.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. Very, again, comprehensive, and also, I guess we should be keeping our eyes out for crocodiles in the near future, potentially. So thank you for that warning. Claire, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's so beautiful to hear the articulation of things, like giving words to things that many of us have felt in our bodies or felt, but as they're named, it makes it more visible and more tangible to sort of navigate to. And I'm just wondering, I'm really curious about how do we create the conditions for people to find themselves, because so much of this has been knocked out of us and we're having to rediscover and unlearn what really painful process that And so, yeah, I think different communities probably have different challenges, but none of it exists. Like these are patterns of behavior that need to be affirmed and, like a child, sort of nurtured and developed. I'm just wondering if you have seen where the like creating the conditions and with different communities, maybe settler communities as well as Indigenous communities, where those conditions are nurtured, and like where you've seen that done well.
Yeah, I don't know if because of the conditions, as you mentioned, it can be hard. Like when you're expected to work every day. When I go back to that initial slide of the body and how bodies are treated and exploited and extracted from and overworked and overused and underappreciated, and these things are becoming enculturated, so they can be really difficult to address and they can be quite challenging to break the patterns of. That's not to say it's impossible, but I think it would just require starting small and like I said, just building that muscle because it's something that has kind of, deteriorated over time for a lot of us um, because of the circumstances. But, if you have a backyard, then you have a platform to do these types of things. It's just a matter of kind of taking time to do it, minimizing distractions um, and prioritizing it and seeing it as valuable as well, because a lot of people probably don't see it as valuable, or we use different mechanisms to tap into um, our re-embodiment. Um, One of the things that I think is really important is acknowledging that, while we don't have, while a lot of people don't have direct connections to things like Indigenous cultures in the I like in the contemporary sense, but everybody is comes from an Indigenous culture at some point, and it's usually not that distant in history. It's only, the last couple of 100 years that your ancestors were doing these things. They were out walking on the country. They had their songs, they had their dreamings, they had their stories and their histories and their rituals and their ceremonies and their practices, and those have to come from somewhere. And a lot of them have come just through, embodying and going, this might be a good place to dance or to take my shoes off. And then when you start doing that every day, and then, if you've got kids or if you've got siblings or nieces and nephews, or pets even, you can take those and they become part of that ritual too. So what happens is that body embodiment at the practitioner level or at the level of the individual, then there's an opportunity to scale that. I do this with my dog every day, and it does the same thing. It goes, over here, and it finds the latrine, and it starts working itself into that community, and then the community starts evolving. So you kind of in a bit of a dance with your bioregion, the more that you connect with it, and as that connection continues, then you find ways of naturally existing in that environment um, based on what the land, how it shifts and how it molds and how it shapes itself in accordance with your presence there now. Um, and that has benefits for you. So this is why I call it co-processing and why they're all mechanisms, is because they have to be done in partnership and they have to be done in relation with the country. And so, what I'd invite is just going back to that sensor framework of just taking the time to work through those, and you can do that in your backyard. You can go outside and just settle. You can stand or sit comfortably and just let your body slow down and notice things that are happening in your body, like your breath. Have a look around and see where you are, and then engaging in that process. So you know, considering where you are physically, asking yourself, like, what is this place? And, what is this country? Typically, if I go out onto a landscape, I might try and work that out first because that gives me a lot of information. If I go out to a forest and I'm like, oh, this is gum country or this is ironbark country, or which means that it's this type of soil, which means that I can find these plants here, this might be medicine country or it might be berry country. So all knowing those cues and those signals can give you a lot of information about the ecology, but you have to be there, and you kind of have to be there regularly to build a familiarity and a relationship with it, to then understand, okay, if this is gum country and there's going to be these plants in this ecology, then what's my responsibility in that process? I have to use this plant um to crush up on my hands and rub on my skin so that the mosquitoes that I know are coming after the rainy season um, are going to be attacking me, or the sandflies. So I might go find a tea tree bush, which I know I can find near water. So all these are patterned in a certain way. And when you start engaging with them, they pattern you in a certain way. And then you carry that pattern and that process. But you kind of just have to start and be consistent and build, like I said before, build that muscle.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Michelle had a question. I think she's able to voice that, and then I may have a question after that, picking up on one of the things that you just said. But I'll also keep an eye out on the sidebar and prioritize any other questions that come in. But Michelle, over to you for your question.
Thank you, Joshua, for this. I'm just really that attunement is feels like something I'm thirsty for, and I guess, and so I'm a grandmother, and it seems as I watch one of my grandchildren maybe in the water or at the shore or in a forest, that if you just watch them, it seems that they are attuned and relating, and they're in sync, and I'm thinking that some adults and some cultures are better at helping the child do those things that you talked about, figuring out their responsibility, watching their patterns, and probably modernity, the modern culture, like don't get dirty, take your hands out of there. That we're actually stifling something that maybe we could start in some places by watching the kids and learning from them. And yeah, that's what I was curious about.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm sure a poet somewhere, some way has said something like that about, we're all children in nature and we're all learning, and, we have these ideas and projections about nature being our mother, and we're all and you can follow that in any sense you like. You can follow it spiritually, you can follow it culturally, you can follow it biologically and evolutionarily, and they all point to the same thing, that this entity, this that we live on is much, much, much older than us, and it has an intelligence that it embodies itself, and it has its own patterns and processes which it follows and which work for it. And the likelihood of life existing at all, I think, is sometimes taken for granted when we go outside, or when we extract from the landscape, or when we come into relationship with certain places and we're like, this is just here, rather than looking at the process about and the conditions that shaped it and its immense improbability to exist at all, is something that should be seen as phenomenal, let alone we get to exist here with it, and we also get to play a critical role in shaping what that looks like, because humans have always done that. We've always been in those systems, and now we're not so much in those systems, or we've created new systems which detract or take away from those systems, or they contradict them in some ways. So when we reframe that and we come back and we look at what is our role here, I would say, yeah, children are really good examples of that. But also reminding us that we're children ourselves, and we're kind of just learning, and we're coming back into relationship with these places. Because one of the things that I would hope is sort of emphasized through this re-embodiment process is is kind of that it's not always pretty. Like you might walk out again either into your backyard, or I remember doing this as a kid, like walking around, and you might step in a place with bare feet, and there might be like um we call them cat heads, but they're like really spiky and they're really painful if you step on them, or walking through the bush and these cactuses would get stuck to your legs, and they would hurt. So, and the longer you left them in, the harder they were to get out. And so, like, sometimes it's not always pretty, um, being in relation with those landscapes. And that's where, that cognitive process has to come in. And you're like, oh, I won't do that again, or I won't go to that place and not wear shoes. Or, when that sticks into my skin, it hurts. So I'm going to try to avoid them. So that's just part of, that dynamic configuration of the relationship, but it has to be present and it has to be aware, and that's where the attunement comes in to go, okay, like now I understand why these things are happening or how they happen, and I understand that there's these processes that other species have, where it might be trying to hitch a ride on my socks up to a different part of the landscape, and yeah, and that's just a form of migration. And so, we honor that when birds do it, but, when things impact us negatively, we kind of look at it a little bit differently. But it's all just part of the process, and it's just something that we need to learn by doing and learn as we go along, the same way that, kids might be doing when they're splashing in the water or when they're walking along the shoreline, and they're seeing these things that just all exist within that place. And it's just a reminder to them, every interaction, that they're part of that place too. And so that's the key learning for them coming into those spaces. Then, as people who are relearning how to connect more deeply with their place, maybe that's a good reminder for us too.
Mhm. Thank you, Josh. I'm going to go ahead and pose a question myself that came up, and I think this will end up being the last one because we want to save about 7 or 8 minutes for some closing announcements at the end. So you mentioned that all humans are indigenous, or come from an indigenous connection to place. And that idea of sort of reasserting that indigeneity or re-indigenizing is something that has been embraced by some in the bioregional movement. One of the prominent players in the field, Joe Brewer, recently voiced that in an interview with us for a research project that we're working on. And yet at the same time, I've seen that be voiced in social media, and indigenous folks say, pointing out that there's deeper political dynamics to that in terms of potential appropriation of indigenous identity. So I just wondered if you had your own thoughts on sort of the legitimacy or the complexity or the controversial nature of the claim of re-indigenizing.
Yeah, I love that question. Thanks, Bill. That's a really key point to acknowledge, which is why, when I sort of say those things, I'm hoping that people hear that I was Indigenous. I come from an Indigenous culture, not necessarily I am Indigenous to this place. And we have those complexities in Australia as well, where obviously this whole landscape was shaped by Indigenous people and multiple and many different language groups. Sometimes people say, up to 250 to 400 different language groups that are spoken across a massive continent. So something that I usually point to is, the same diversity that exists in Europe, where you've got like, all these different countries, and they're seen and acknowledged for their differences. They have different languages, different religions, different cuisines, and it's the same with Indigenous groups. So that map still exists across all the territory, and there's still signals and indicators there for that linguistic and cultural and spiritual diversity. And so part of the colonial project is to try and wipe out and extinguish the presence and the existence of those people and their stories and their histories and their languages and their cultures and their ceremonies. So what we have to be really careful about doing is perpetuating that erasure by saying, you know, I'm indigenous to this place now. That completely erases the story and the history and the culture of the people who were there for, you know, tens of thousands of years before any non-indigenous people came to those places. So this process of working out how to come back into relation with those places, it really has to start with asking yourself, you know, what is the history of this place and who was here before and what did it look like and what were the practices? And you can only do that by, you know, you can do that by reading books, but the best way to do it is to, you know, seek those people out. If you're on a landscape or if you're in a bioregion, and you notice that it needs work, there's usually a practice that's not too far beneath the surface. And I mean that literally because I've got a friend who is currently working in that space of doing a PhD about looking at the soil samples and looking at the burn frequency beneath the soil. So, you know, as you dig further down, you start to see different changes in the environment. It shows you a timeline where, you know, burning might have only been taken off the landscape for, you know, 100 years. And her ancestors, there's evidence as you go further deep into the soil of regular, consistent, deliberate fire being put on the country, because, and you know, for tens of thousands of years. So this whole continent was shaped by fire, and it was deliberate, consistent use of fire as a tool to enhance the ecologies. So that's the story of the landscape. It's literally in the land. And you can look at trees the same. If there's trees that are being felled, you can look at the rings and they can give you really important indicators for the presence and the consistent practices and processes implemented by people for tens of thousands of years. So these are the people who hold the story. And while a lot of those people and their families and communities have been removed off the landscape, the story is still there, and there's still people who can tell it and share it with you. So find those people, connect with them, and learn more about the place where you are because they can support you in coming into deeper relationship with it. And if there's no people there, you know, either you can connect with the country, like I said, the story's still there. The trees know it, the soil knows it, the plants know it. The species probably are carrying out the same processes and practices that they've been, you know, intergenerationally. And and if the landscape's too far beyond gone, like you might be the person to reinitiate that and and you know, develop some new place-based initiatives around that. But you can't do that by yourself. You have to do it in community.
Thank you, Joshua. That's really, really comprehensive and helpful answer. And it also circles back to one of the original questions was Roger Matledge asked whether this was just applying to human or more than human. And I think you answered it in your presentation, but you've also just answered it again, that this is very much about a you know, human and more than human space. So let's all again pause and give some deep appreciation to Joshua Waters for sharing with us your knowledge, both from yourself and your life, and the knowledge from your studying right now in the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Lab and Collective. Thank you again. Okay, so there's a few things that we wanted to mention in closing here. Ralph, do you want me to go ahead and voice these? Do you want to jump on and voice them? I know it's late where you're at.
I can start, but might hand it over to you at a certain point. So just very quickly, we mentioned the 9 open dialogues now, and you can all find them on the Open Dialogues landing page on our website, and the link is in the slides as well. So there's an easy way to find these conversations back or these dialogues back, and also rewatch or revisit all earlier sessions as well. Then we wanted to just alert you to the fact that we're in the middle of the planning of our 2026 conference, which will happen September 8 to 10. It's our 13th annual R3.0 conference 2026. And again, it's fully devoted to the topic of bioregionalism. We've chosen a title that also reflects a lot of the structure that we're going to cover in the conference. So it's we call it Bioregional Regeneration as Collapse Resilience, with three major components: Earth-centric bioregional kinship, bioregional knowledge commons, and bioregional governance. And just to let you know that the planning of the conference or the curation is a little bit different than last year. You see it covers 3 days. Each day will cover one of these three major topics. And we're then also organizing with a couple of hours later a first debrief into for the global confluences that are happening in parallel, because our conference is accompanied by parallel in-person bioregional confluences. And I think there's a next slide that will also go into that in a bit more depth. And so we want to do a debrief session by the end of the day, and then we'll have another debrief session in the morning of the next day. And that is not to wake you up early, but to make sure that we cover most of the time zones and most of the confluences, and that they have a chance to debrief with us really during the day or on the next day. So this is a bit different than we did it last year, to cater to the needs of the confluences. And just very quickly, bioregional confluences are groups or place-based bioregional groups all across the globe. Last year, we experimented with that and had more than 50 groups. We might have even more than that this year. Just 3 or 4 weeks into the process, we have already more than 20 of these confluences registered with us. There's an expression of interest page or confluence registration form, you may call it, where you can register confluences, and that gets you into the whole flow of information. We're also doing monthly sessions, and I think some of the next slides will cover that. And Bill, maybe you want to say something about those and round it off.
Yeah, thanks, Ralph. So our March spotlight in our confluencing community calls focused on Mornington Peninsula bioregion in Australia. And we had Tommy Winfrey talking and the team from Regenerating Mornington Peninsula. So that's something that is open to all folks who have registered for bioregional confluences. So that's over 350 folks from last year. And already this year, I think the majority of our confluence registrations are coming in from newcomers. So that's what happened this month. That just happened last week. And then next month, we are spotlighting the Northeast Woodlands on Turtle Island. That's the bioregion that I'm based in. And that's going to spotlight the Northeast Woodlands Bioregion Collective that I engage in, the sister intertribal alliance that is affiliated with that collective, and then the Lake Champlain confluence, which is in the same bioregion, but this is a separate group of people who are meeting and sort of clustered around the University of Vermont Leadership for the Ecozoic program. So those three sort of organizations will be represented in next month's confluencing community call. And so again, you can attend those calls by, if you're not already a confluencing community member, just by registering for a confluence, and then we immediately welcome you into that community and share information about those calls. So I think that's, we've also got the Confluencing Fund, which last year we had a 21,000 euro fund from the foundation that supported us, Lankelly Chase, this year, and that was used to support the Confluencing. This year, we don't have that funding anymore, so we're fundraising for the Confluencing Fund with a goal of $50,000, so more than doubling the amount that we've got, so that we can cover more confluences than last year, and B, we share it equally amongst 3 different tiers of confluence sizes. And so we hope to up the amount that we can share with each confluence. So I think that's it. Okay, great. That brings us to a close. Thanks again to Joshua and to all of your colleagues at the Indigenous Knowledge Lab, Knowledge Systems Lab and Collective. And thanks to all of you for such really wonderful questions and engagement. And we look forward to seeing you all next month. We've just announced it, so I didn't get it into the slides, but we just announced April 20th as our next Bioregional Open Dialogue with Alexander Sterling from Turtle Island Community Capital, Cheryl Chin and Donna Morton from Salmon Returns, and Sid Griffith from Kinship Earth Flow Funding. So details on that are on our website and social media. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Joshua, and take care.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you.
Great to see you.